Hi, my name is Steve Haley. I'm the Director of Marketing Engagement at the Mojaloop Foundation. We're here to talk about a topic called digital sovereignty, which is a pretty wide and starting to develop into a really important discussion, especially when we think about the growth and the importance of digital public infrastructure. Now, concerns about digital sovereignty have been around for quite a while. Countries have long debated what they should allow to be stored and processed in the cloud and how. And those are a lot of concerns over the privacy of citizen data from large multinational tech companies, including social media and e-commerce. In fact, many years ago, I heard the expression, data is the new oil. So we probably should have imagined that we should put some rules and restrictions in place to make sure that countries have the ability to own and control what data is allowed to be used by people outside of their borders. Just like any other national resource and natural resource that has been often exploited in a lot of countries, data was going to be the same thing. But it's not only about protecting citizens and maintaining control over data. It's about control over critical national infrastructure, like roads and railway and airports, but now digital infrastructure. So think about the cloud example. Countries want to control not only what data is being stored and processed outside of their borders, but also making sure that they're not subject to foreign laws that they have no control over, that they could be cut off at any time depending on geopolitical events, and quite a number of other concerns around digital sovereignty that I hope we're going to get into today. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the panelists who are going to be joining us today. First, we've got Liv Nordhag, the co-lead of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, Wale Goodluck, the Deputy CEO of Africanunda, Sharon Umunyana, the Technical Project Manager of the Rwanda Information Society Authority, or RISA, and Paula Hunter, the Executive Director at the Mojaloop Foundation. Welcome, everybody, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on a lot of these very pointed questions. We're going to be going through this in a lightning round panel, which means the panelists are only going to have less than a minute to talk about some of these important questions to make sure they're able to cover them as quickly as possible. So with that, let's jump into really understanding what we're talking about. And I'd like to point first to Wale. Can you describe for me what is digital sovereignty in 60 seconds or less?
Thank you, Steve. Digital sovereignty means different things to a lot of people, but I like to think that digital sovereignty refers to the capacity of the state to exercise control over digital assets within the country, including but not limited to control over the physical layer. And there we're talking about infrastructure, technology, the code layer, standard rules and design, and the data layer, where, of course, we're going to be talking about ownership, the flow of the data, and the use. Digital sovereignty is often motivated by different interests, such as protecting citizens, protecting the state, increasing domestic competitiveness, protecting core democratic values, national interest, and security. Digital sovereignty is an all-inclusive term reinforcing the desire of nation states to reduce reliance on digital infrastructure and services controlled and regulated by foreign providers. At the ITU Conference on International Telecommunications in 2012, 89 countries, including 21 African countries, supported a proposal for equal rights for all governments to manage internet numbering, naming, addressing, and identification of resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Wale. That was a very comprehensive answer. I'd like to give it to Liv now and give her thoughts. So Liv, same question. Digital sovereignty in 60 seconds or less.
No, thank you so much for that question. And let me just start by saying that I very much agree with Wale that there is no authoritative definition and that digital sovereignty means different things to different people. I would like to mention one definition that I like, which was published by Germany in relation to the Gaia X project. And they define digital sovereignty as the possibility of independent self-determination by the state and by organizations with regard to the use and structuring of digital systems themselves, the data produced and stored in them, and the processes depicted as a result. And more metaphorically, I think what this talks about is digital sovereignty being about ensuring that countries can be in the driver's seat of their own digital transformation journeys and make strategic decisions about that journey.
Thank you, Liv. Paula, if we can dig down a little bit more specific, because as we just heard, it's a very broad and unclearly defined topic. Specifically, what does digital sovereignty mean in terms of digital public infrastructure?
Well, I mean, I think you'll hear this word over and over again today. It's about control of your infrastructure, how it's deployed, and who maintains and secures it. It's broader than just data. And while many entities want to ensure their data is not in the cloud, it's also important to be able to dictate how the software is deployed and where, how this infrastructure is built out. Is it done totally in-house? Is it done with vendors in country? Is it done with vendors offshore? And the other thing is, this doesn't mean that you cannot integrate your infrastructure with our other parties. Having an open platform allows you to have the appropriate APIs in place that you can have cross-border engagement with which is critical for allowing other citizens flexibility in how they engage with other parties. For example, family members that may live in another country. So while control is important, it doesn't come at the expense of flexibility. And so being able to make the decisions as how the infrastructure is deployed and how it is linked in with other infrastructures is critical.
Sharon, I'd like to ask you the same question. First, just generally your views on digital public infrastructure and sovereignty, but then a follow-up of specifically, what is RISA working on, and how does RISA work to ensure digital sovereignty in Rwanda?
Thank you, Steve. Not far from what Paula mentioned, and as we all know, when we talk about digital public infrastructure, we're talking about the foundational digital systems and services provided by the government for the public's benefit. And we're talking about, e-government platforms, digital ID, and other public digital utilities. So in the context of digital sovereignty in relation to DPI, we're talking about, on top of what Paula mentioned, we're talking about data protection. This platform, the data stored on these platforms, how it's processed, how it's stored, and accessed in a way that is in line with the country's, in this context, Rwanda's data protection law. We're also talking about interoperability. Is this infrastructure able to seamlessly integrate with various digital services and ensure they function cohesively within the national digital ecosystem? We're also talking about independence, being less reliant on foreign technology providers, which can be very critical when we're talking about security and other economic reasons. In terms of what RISA is doing is we're looking at developing infrastructure that is instrumental in developing and promoting, the platforms that I mentioned, e-government platforms and services. We're looking at, local innovation. And also, RISA is also playing a role in defining digital standards and policies, as well as capacity building and cybersecurity, focusing on enhancing Rwanda's cybersecurity measures to protect its digital assets and infrastructure.
Thank you. And I think most people have probably heard quite a bit about what Rwanda is doing in terms of DPI and what you're bringing forth in terms of the national goal of independence, which I think is incredible and inspiring for a lot of people. And anyone on the topic of DPI, if anyone hasn't looked at the recent paper that was released by the G20, which outlined a plan for DPI, it talked about most of the things that you all just mentioned, but doesn't explicitly mention sovereignty as a goal, which I think is unfortunate, but a great first step in terms of discussing DPI. So getting into a little bit more discussion of why this is so important, now that we understand what it is, I'd like to turn back to Liv and ask, what are the risks of not having digital sovereignty? Very broad question, but please.
No, thank you, Stephen. I'll start by actually giving one very broad answer before I exemplify it very briefly. I would say that the ultimate risk of not having digital sovereignty is that digitalization efforts fail to deliver on their transformative potential. It's as simple as that. Because not having digital sovereignty means that you're not able to steer and strategically manage your decisions in a way that is relevant to you. This can mean that you're locked into someone else's priorities, that being a private company or another country. It can limit interoperability between your different digital components, impairing the opportunity to effectively and inclusively reach the population with critical services. You can have very costly lock-ins because of prohibitively expensive change fees in contracts when you need to make adaptations, which you invariably will need to do. And in the long term, it can really land countries in this eternal loop of being recipients and clients rather than owners and creators and builders of their own technologies.
Thanks. I really like that idea of the clients rather than creators and owners. And I think some of the great success stories we've seen on DPI in the past few years have really shown the advantages of having all of that be created locally. And so I want to ask the same question, first to Paula, then Sharon, but with a slightly different twist of rather than the risks, let's focus on the positive. What are the advantages of having digital sovereignty, particularly when it comes to digital public infrastructure? First for Paula.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, again, I think I'll use that control word. What's really important here with digital sovereignty is that no other company or vendor should be able to dictate how your software is deployed, where the data is stored, or how the infrastructure is maintained. And as Liv mentioned, maintenance and enhancement of that infrastructure can get expensive over time. And it's critical that the DPI is deployed using open standards, but with the ability to control the solution locally. This allows for predictability on the costs. And when using open source software, it provides the ability to enhance the software in-house or with a trusted local vendor, but also with the community associated with the software. So having access to an open source community allows for more testing and enhancement of the software. And again, the entity that owns the infrastructure controls what enhancements are deployed back into the platform.
Thank you, Paul. And so, Sharon, same question. What is the advantage of digital sovereignty, particularly when it comes to DPI?
I'll talk about economic growth. When we have digital sovereignty, particularly DPIs in our country, we are promoting local technology solutions and services. That way, the country can stimulate job creation, local innovation. Here, we're also looking at the advantage of policy autonomy. The country has set its digital standards, regulations, and policies. So it's best when you have DPIs, which allows you to have these policies, regulations without external influence. We're also talking about digital resilience. With the control of our own digital infrastructure, us as Rwanda are better positioned to handle digital crises. We are able to fight, system outages, to cyber attacks and the likes. And one key component that when we talk about citizens, we find that this promotes trust. Citizens trust a digital system that is perceived as being under the nation's control and regulation.
Amazing. Thank you, Sharon. Liv, let's get into some specifics of how do we achieve that. So first, can you define for us what is a DPG? You're at the Digital Public Goods Alliance. What is a DPG, and how can DPGs help countries building sovereign DPIs? So
DPGs, it's a definition that builds on the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. So digital public goods are open source software, open data, open AI systems, and open content collections that adhere to privacy and other applicable laws and best practices, do no harm, and help attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Digital public goods can be of critical importance for helping countries build out their digital public infrastructure capabilities because they provide a built-for-purpose open alternative to either building your own from scratch, which is not affordable or within the human capacities for many countries, or to lease or buy proprietary, which has these lock-ins that we just discussed. So in a way, you can think of digital public goods as a third way, an alternative for building digital public infrastructure. And they are always open source. I think that is a critical part to mention, because you can have digital public infrastructure that is proprietary, but digital public goods will always be open source solutions that you can use to build your DPI.
Thank you, Liv. I think that's an important clarification. Again, those topics are becoming crucial to a lot of discussions that we're having globally, especially in the world of development. And I think it's important that more and more people understand those definitions. So Sharon, going back to Rwanda and your experiences there, you've touched on it a little bit, but can you dig deeper into how RISA is helping Rwanda achieve its digital sovereignty goals and what those digital sovereignty goals might be?
Right. Thank you, Steve. So RISA contributes in a number of ways. RISA has been instrumental in developing and promoting digital infrastructure in Rwanda, including e-government platforms and services. RISA also supports tech innovators and startups to ensure Rwanda reduces its dependency on foreign technologies. RISA also plays a role in defining digital standards, policies, and regulations that guide Rwanda's digital transformation journey. We're also focusing on capacity building and training within the Rwanda digital sector to ensure that as Rwanda, we have the requisite skills to maintain our digital sovereignty. RISA is also highly involved in enhancing Rwanda's cybersecurity measures to protect its digital assets and infrastructure, as well as initiatives often focusing on ensuring that the benefits of the digital revolution reach all parts of the Rwandan society, ensuring that we have a broad approach to digital sovereignty. So our main goal is to ensure that as a nation we retain control and autonomy over our digital infrastructure to allow us to shape and guide the journey that Rwanda is on of digital transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And we've been talking about this broad topic of digital sovereignty and ways to achieve it. But I'd like to dig into something that's very specific to a few of us, which is around financial inclusion. So Wally, I'd like to turn to you and say, specifically, what are some of the advantages to achieving financial inclusion goals of having digital sovereignty?
Thank you very much, Steve. For financial inclusion to thrive in Africa, we need people to adopt digital technologies, digital platforms. And for that to thrive, they must trust and there must be security. So digital sovereignty allows countries to establish regulations and mechanisms to protect citizens' data from unauthorized access, misuse, or surveillance by foreign entities. With increasing dependence on digital technologies, safeguarding sensitive information becomes crucial for privacy, security, and the recurring decimal of national interest. I think another key factor is around economic development. Digital sovereignty enables countries to foster the development of their own digital industries and promote domestic innovation and entrepreneurship. So with sovereignty, you are able to more localize and address the demands in that market, as opposed to wholesale adoption from foreign controlled and regulated platforms. It creates opportunities, and we have seen also that digital sovereignty will help ensure a fair amount of redundancy, thus allowing little or no impact to financial systems and services and downtime when there are national interest conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you, Wally. And Paula, same question specifically. What are some of the advantages to financial inclusion of having digital sovereignty?
Yes. Well, financial inclusion success is dependent on delivering low or no cost access to financial systems. So with control on how your offerings are delivered to your constituents, it can reduce the financial burdens that sometimes commercial entities attach to a solution. It's why some people remain underserved. Most important, ensuring that external vendors cannot have undue influence in how your infrastructure is priced to the beneficiaries of that platform. Local vendors can often offer you support to your deployment team at a lower cost than external parties that are in other countries or even off the continent. So reaching unbanked and underserved has been a challenge for some of these commercial entities. Engaging at the country level allows you to help deliver these solutions and increase the success of bringing folks into the financial system.
All right. Thank you, Paul. I obviously agree, and that's what we're all aiming to do. I'd like to give the last word to Wale. We've talked a lot about sovereignty, and it makes it sometimes feel like countries should go into their own world and try to do everything themselves. But that's obviously not possible. We live in a global economy. So sovereignty can't mean isolation. So when does assistance or expertise cross the line and start reducing sovereignty?
Thank you again, Steve. Like you said, digital sovereignty must not necessarily demand or imply isolation. Countries need assistance and they must collaborate with other nations to address global digital challenges, such as cross-border data flows and cyber security challenges. I think there's a lot of opportunity around collaboration, cooperation. One of the main challenges in data sovereignty today is data localization. Some countries require organizations to store and process all data within their borders. This can impede cross-border data flows. It can impede cross-border payments, trade, and generally the ability for us to grow intra-Africa trade. To overcome these challenges, I think our policymakers and businesses must strike a balance between data protection and the free flow of information that will help drive innovation, drive convenience, drive costs down, and help build a bigger economic cake for us in Africa. Thank you.
All right. So I'd like to thank Liv, Wale, Sharon, and Paula for this amazing discussion. We've really dug into some of the depths of what is digital sovereignty and how are some ways to achieve it. We've looked at the specific example of Rwanda, which I think most countries are already looking at to say, okay, this is how it could be done, and really applauding the efforts that you're doing and what RISA is doing for that. And then lastly, I think we looked at specifically how that applies to financial inclusion, which is very important for a few of us. And I think some of the areas around independence and the ability to shape the kinds of products and services that are being offered are going to be critical, whether it's financial inclusion, reaching the last mile, or any other digital service. If they're not localized, it's going to be very difficult to make sure that we are designing to reach some of the hardest to reach citizens in our countries. So with that, I very much want to thank the panelists once again, and look forward to continuing this discussion with you over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.